In 2020 and 2021, Rabbi Yisroel Goldstein was charged and convicted for conspiracy to defraud the government and wire fraud. He's a revered holy man, a religious leader, and the last person on earth anyone would expect to commit a felony. So why did he do it? And who else was involved in Goldstein's elaborate tax scheme? Decades before he ever committed fraud, Goldstein worked as a rabbi, preaching out of a storefront in a suburban shopping center in northern San Diego. The desert hills were a slight change from the crowded streets of Brooklyn, but Goldstein adapted quickly and established his synagogue, the Chabad of Poway. By 2019, the synagogue grew to become a significant presence in the Jewish community. That same year, a 19-year-old named John T. Ernest walked into the synagogue building during Goldstein's Passover service and opened fire. The shooting left Goldstein with permanent damage to his hands. Ernest was apprehended after his gun jammed. In the aftermath of the shooting, Goldstein and his congregation found themselves gracing national headlines. Goldstein was praised for his strong leadership and calls for peace in a time of anger, pain, and fear. He would stand in front of traumatized crowds of people, his fragmented hands wrapped in blue bandages, and offer words of peaceful wisdom to anyone listening. At one point, he even got to meet President Trump. However, underneath the strong community leadership exhibited by Goldstein, there was a multi-million-dollar tax fraud operation deep in the cellar. While the media focused on the shooting, Goldstein was in the middle of an FBI investigation. 1 year and 3 months after the deadly synagogue shooting, Rabbi Goldstein pleaded guilty to several counts of fraud. In the blink of an eye, Goldstein went from being praised to vilified. His reputation was forever tainted when the shocking details of his crimes were released to the public. But he wasn't the only one. In 2008, Ellis donated $1,000 to Friendship Circle, a charity focused on assisting kids with disabilities. Friendship Circle is located on the Chabad community property and overseen by the Chabad's founder, Rabbi Goldstein. The rabbi, however, did not accept Ellis's donation so much as he requested it. Ellis, 42, was at Qualcomm, a California computer chip manufacturer. He served as a low-level manager when Goldstein initially asked the 29-year-old Ellis to help out with some local kids in need. Goldstein took donations from Ellis again in 2009 and again in 2010. Ellis continued donating to Goldstein's charities until 2019, by which time his annual contributions had grown to $5,000. In addition to the donations, Ellis wrote off $55,600 worth of daycare tuition from the Chabad Community Center Child Care Services for 5 years straight. How did Ellis manage to write off so much money through a child care tax deduction? The truth is, he didn't. All the donations and write-off were fraudulent. The first $1,000 Ellis donated was returned to the Qualcomm manager with a receipt to give to the IRS. And of that $1,000 Goldstein returned, the rabbi kept around 10% of it himself. Experts call this an old-fashioned 90-10 tax scheme. Ellis's reward came from Goldstein's donation receipts, which he used to avoid paying $1,000 and eventually $5,000. In total, from 2008 to 2019, Ellis avoided paying $27,000 in taxes. But he wasn't the only employee from Qualcomm donating to Goldstein's charities. Another Qualcomm employee, Rodham Cooper, was also responsible for defrauding the IRS out of $27,000. Both his and Ellis's schemes have much in common. They both worked at Qualcomm and owed their former employer a lot of money. Cooper, who worked as an engineering manager, began taking advantage of Qualcomm's donation matching policy. Ellis continued to pull the same scam when he got promoted to a mid-level management position in 2016, which meant Qualcomm would match any donation up to $5,000. A big step up from the initial $1,000 contributions Ellis pretended to give back in 2008. All the money Qualcomm donated fell right into the pockets of Cooper and Ellis, with a small portion going to Goldstein. While $54,000 might sound like a lot, Cooper and Ellis have nothing on another scheme participant named Stuart Weinstock. Unlike the previous scheme participants, Weinstock, currently 64, owned his own business, a small grocery store called Salsa Market. Beginning in 2010, Weinstock began meeting monthly with Goldstein. During those meetings, the rabbi and Weinstock would make their exchanges. Suddenly, Weinstock became highly charitable, on paper at least. Investigators found that Weinstock was donating around $8,000 a month to Goldstein's charities. According to prosecutors, the rabbi was taking a much higher percentage of Weinstock's donations. Of the roughly $8,000 Goldstein took from Weinstock, he sliced off a 25% chunk and kept that for himself, leaving his donor with roughly $6,000. And, just like Cooper and Ellis, Weinstock used the donation receipts to write off large sums of money on his taxes. But how much? Weinstock ceased his tax fraud operation in 2018. By that point, authorities believe Weinstock defrauded the government out of at least $180,000, with some estimates putting the total amount at $250,000. Overall, investigators believe that from 2010 to 2018, Weinstock donated more than $870,000 to the Chabad. Of that $870,000, $650,000 was given back to him by Rabbi Goldstein alongside the deductible receipts. Weinstock would also claim the checks he sent to Goldstein were business expenses just to shake it up from time to time. Though he contributed a massive percentage of the money to Goldstein's scheme, Weinstock was by no means the only other participant. Several minor players pleaded guilty to participating in Goldstein's 90-10 tax scam, even someone related to the disgraced rabbi. Cooper, Ellis, and Weinstock were the more notable participants who pleaded guilty. Prosecutors have a list of around 24 other individuals, including some of the largest fraudsters by capital: Dr. Bruce Baker, Alexander Avragun, and Mendel Goldstein, Rabbi Goldstein's older brother. Dr. Bruce's scheme was a bit different from the others. For starters, his numbers are higher. Investigators believe the 75-year-old pediatric dentist was responsible for not paying $644,000 in taxes. His fake donations amount to over $2 million. Goldstein's bogus contributions amounted to $6.4 million total, making Dr. Baker responsible for around one-third of them. But, unlike the other conspirators, Dr. Baker never got his donations back. Instead, he allowed Goldstein to spend his money for him. Dr. Baker instructed Goldstein to pay for menial things, such as his children's private school tuition and dental school tuition. Goldstein also distributed cash to Dr. Baker's relatives, among several other large purchases like paying off creditors. Another way Dr. Baker differed from his fellow donors was that not all his donations came in cash. For example, Dr. Baker donated an ancient Torah worth $1.2 million to a charity run by a mysterious person known to investigators as YF. In truth, however, the Torah never existed. Dr. Baker pleaded guilty to his crimes and was later sentenced to 15 months in custody. The dentist's age probably kept him from suffering a harsher sentence. Other scheme participants may not be so lucky. One such participant is Alexander Avragun. In 2019, Alexander Avragun was found in Latvia, a small country in northeastern Europe, and extradited to the United States. Since then, Avragun has been convicted of his crimes. But despite the court's conviction, Avragun's sentence hearings continue to get pushed back, despite pleading guilty to several different white-collar criminal charges after being indicted in 2019. Most of those charges have absolutely nothing to do with Goldstein and carry with them a max 20-year sentence. In San Diego, locals knew Avragun as a real estate agent. To Goldstein, on the other hand, Avragun was his salesman. He helped Goldstein recruit new donors for the scheme. Prosecutors believe Avragun helped talk 9 taxpayers into donating $275,000 from 2010 to 2015. Avragun also helped Goldstein pay them back. However, his involvement went beyond just operating the scheme. Avragun lent his expertise to Goldstein by helping him orchestrate a giant fraud scheme which involved obtaining money from agencies like the Federal Emergency Management Agency, more commonly known as FEMA. It worked like this. Goldstein would request grant money for repairs, security upgrades, and community programs from FEMA, but keep the money instead of spending it on the Chabad. Thanks to Avragun's expertise in fabricating documents, Goldstein and his young partner stole $875,000 from FEMA and other government agencies who presumed they were aiding a proactive religious organization. As criminal as those actions were, they are not enough to get you 20 years in an orange jumpsuit. Avragun, the San Diego real estate agent, spent 2010 to 2016 running a retirement investor Ponzi scheme. In total, he cheated his retired victims out of $12 million. Mendel never lived in San Diego, but is believed to have defrauded as much money as Avragun. On the surface, Mendel appeared to be a regular resident of Brooklyn, where he and his brother grew up together. There, he owned and operated a videography business, a business the rabbi wanted a piece of. So, in 2012, Rabbi Goldstein proposed a partnership with his brother's business and the Chabad of Poway. He planned to funnel Mendel's videography freelance revenue into Chabad-owned bank accounts where they would go undetected by the IRS and into Mendel's pockets through phony checks. In the end, genetics and greed won out, and Mendel agreed to the deal. The checks started flooding in. According to the DOJ, they were signed by individuals named Mr. Green and Mr. Fish. Not suspicious at all, right? When the partnership ended in 2018, Mendel had evaded $155,000 worth of taxes. Mendel later told law enforcement that he stopped sending his money to San Diego because he learned IRS investigators were inspecting him for tax evasion. Nevertheless, he still got caught. And though Mendel's part in the scheme is interesting, a few other convicted schemers are worth mentioning. The first dishonorable mention is 55-year-old Igor Shtilkind. Igor worked for an aerospace and defense technology company based in San Diego. Similar to Ellis and Cooper, Igor managed to get his company to match donations and ended up defrauding them out of $17,500 over 10 years. Boris Scholar, who was 29 years older than our first dishonorable mention, did not let age get in the way of committing fraud. He'd eventually plead guilty but received a life sentence of just 1 year's probation. Yusef Shemirani, the third dishonorable mention, did not fare as well as Boris. The court ordered Yusef to pay a $10,000 fine and punished him with 2 years probation. These are all small prices to pay compared to what Rabbi Goldstein is facing. His sentence has repeatedly been postponed and rescheduled since his conviction. When he is eventually sentenced, Goldstein faces up to 5 years in prison. But while he is attending court, who's running the synagogue? Some believe that the rabbi has not entirely relinquished control of his community. Before his guilty pleas in 2020, Rabbi Goldstein fully controlled both the Chabad and Friendship Circle. However, when Goldstein left his synagogue in handcuffs, his son Mendel, who was named after his uncle, took over day-to-day operations. Upon his ascension to power in July of 2020, Mendel promised to transfer control of Friendship Circle to a group of donors, volunteers, and founders. Except, he did none of those things. Instead, Mendel handed the reins to his brother, Shui. One of the founders of Friendship Circle, Elisheva Green, took notice and, in turn, took his name off the organization he founded. He could no longer be a part of an organization whose goals didn't match its results. In other words, he believed the Friendship Circle's sole purpose was to provide income for Rabbi Goldstein's son and FC's new leader, Yehoshua Shui Goldstein, who had zero experience running a nonprofit or any organization for that matter. There is no hard evidence to suggest Rabbi Goldstein is still running the Chabad of Poway. However, it's easy to prove his family is still running it, a factor Green doesn't see changing anytime soon, despite their patriarch's infamous tax fraud scheme. Click here to watch one of these next videos.